Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Friday. Welcome along to CMI's Better Managers Briefing. This week, we're going to be exploring some of the challenges that are facing leaders and managers in the cultural and creative sectors. And joining me, Matt Roberts, Director of Membership at CMI, are Neil Constable, CEO of Shakespeare's Globe and former chair of the London and South East CMI board, and Terry Corby, Chief Commercial Officer of Creative England and Southwest CMI Regional Board Chair. Neil, Terry, a very warm welcome along to both of you, and thanks for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Matt.
Great. Now, look, before we dive into some questions, I'd just like to let everybody in the audience know that if you have a question for Terry or for Neil today, please type your questions in that window, and the CMI team will pick that up, and we'll do our best to come to as many of those questions as we possibly can before the end of the session. And if you're not yet a CMI member, then I would encourage you to take a look at the link in the description for today's event and find out a little bit more about what we can offer to you. But without further ado, let's dive into some of the questions. And I guess one of the challenges that's probably uniquely facing the cultural and creative sector is both the nature of the organisations and of employment in the sector is throwing up all sorts of nuanced challenges for leaders and managers. I just wonder, Neil, what have your initial learnings been from the last few months around those challenges?
Well, it has been very challenging and will continue to be really challenging until we can open at scale. I think the first thing that we recognised is that you can't run a business when you can't invite your audiences in. The Globe will be normally welcoming 1 million visitors a year, playing to 1,500 people at a performance. And for us, social distance performances don't work. And as an organisation that doesn't receive government subsidy, we would normally be taking £2 million a month, and that has gone down to 10% of that income. So we've had to very quickly reduce our costs of about 1.2 million a month to our burn rate of 400,000. And of course, like most organisations, we were planning to maybe reopen in July or October. And now it's very clear that the performing arts sector is not going to be able to open until sometime next year, or indeed, if not, until a vaccine is available. And so the learnings were quick, but also we recognise that we are going to be very much in the situation for the long game.
Indeed. And Terry, your observations and early learnings from the way in which you've been impacted.
Yes, thanks for that. And I also run the membership program at the Creative Industries Federation as well. So that covers not just England, but the devolved nations and all the subsectors of the creative industries. And it's a different picture across different parts of the creative industries. In Neil's area, in the area of theatre, I mean, some of them may not open until next year sometime, and it's a terrible situation. In other parts of the sector, like gaming, of course, they've been going great guns. So there are different stories everywhere, and I think we're learning as we go. And one of the most difficult things is there isn't a playbook that says, okay, well, here's a global pandemic. You know, you can't, so you've got to socially distance, etc. Here's what you do. So we are, with our sector, learning as we go. The one thing that is common to everybody, of course, as with most businesses, it's about people. And most of our sector is made up of very small companies, freelancers, micro businesses, small businesses, many of whom have fallen through the gaps for a lot of the government support that has come out over the past few months. So what we've been trying to do is fly the flag for the sector. And we put out a campaign back in March called Our World Without Culture to try and galvanise the sector, because it's a very disparate sector as well. It doesn't always work together. That did well in terms of galvanising. We did some research with Oxford Economics to say, you know, what is the financial impact of this for the sector? And we came up with a figure of around 400,000 jobs are going to go in the sector in this year, which is very, very difficult. And all of that has contributed towards sort of a 1.57 million cash coming out of the government for the sector. But, and this is a big but, that will only go so far. And what we're trying to do is help the industry to help itself. And we're seeing the start of a lot of that, actually.
Okay. One of the things that I'm conscious of is part of the mission for both of your organisations is really around the education and the inspiring the next generation of talent and helping to support them through investment, through education, through mentoring. how difficult is it to prioritise that activity, and what do you feel could be the impacts of not doing so in the longer term? And Terry, perhaps if you'd like to take that one first, please.
Sure. Well, a couple of aspects to it, of course. One is primary and secondary education, where the children are just getting back into school. And I guess my slight fear or concern is that the creative subjects might fall to the bottom of the priority list. You know, it's important to have reading and writing, arithmetic, you know, all those things. But it does mean at times like these, sometimes that the creative subjects fall further down the priority list. So that's a concern and something we need to think about. When you get into FE and to higher education, there's so much uncertainty for the universities now around how they're going to be able to operate. It's also difficult to to figure out what the strategy should be for universities and for FE. I think one of the things that we're trying to do, and we've got over 60 universities that are members of the Federation, is to try and figure out how to help students get that first rung into the creative industries. It's traditionally seen as quite a difficult industry to step into unless you sort of know somebody. So we've got to make it easier for those people. And in particular, we've got to give them as many business skills and management skills as creative skills, because they're certainly going to need them.
Indeed, indeed. And Neil, your reflections.
Well, alongside the future generation, we need to think about the current generation. Within our sector, 72% of our employees are freelancers. Back on the 18th of March, when the PM told people to stay away from theatres, I had to terminate contracts for around 200 staff who were either involved in performances in our playhouse at the time, or indeed already in rehearsals. And the self-employed support scheme comes to an end in October. And for theatres, if we aren't able to open until next spring, there won't be any employment for them. And I'm already seeing actors, stage managers, musicians, production managers, wardrobe and wig staff having to look at new careers. And we could be in a situation when we come to reopen that the skills that we have, the skilled colleagues that we've been able to be working with over many years, have had to leave the sector. And so alongside thinking about the future generation, we have been lobbying government hard to recognise that we are going to potentially lose a lot of the creative talent that has been generated in this country if another support scheme isn't put in for them.
So huge potential problems brewing in terms of that talent drain from the sector and from the industry. Just thinking in a little more positive terms for a moment, a lot of people are witnessing major innovation sort of taking place very, very quickly across various sectors through recent months, and things that perhaps would have been felt could be several years away have actually been delivered in a much shorter period of time. Really interested to get both of your perceptions on innovations that you've seen thus far, and whether you think they're likely to sustain in the longer term. And Neil, perhaps we could get your thoughts on that one first.
I think, yeah, the creative organisations are creative at heart, and we have found ways of connecting to our audiences. The Globe, though our doors were shut for 156 days before we reopened for our guided tours, we pivoted to a digital platform. We and hopefully some of people on this session saw our YouTube premieres that we ran when lockdown started with Globe on Screen films. We've had up to 4 million visitors, and what for us has been really interesting is seeing the international audience that have been part of those. We did a festival 2 weekends ago from our playhouse that we've turned into a broadcast studio around Shakespeare and race, both with live content and pre-recorded content. And then you have other organisations like the Old Vic, close to us, who've been doing Zoom performances of one man or one woman plays, alongside someone like English National Opera, who are doing next month up at Alexandra Palace, drive and live opera performances of La Bohème. But of course, these are great innovative ways of still connecting with our audiences and saying we're here for the longer term. But what it doesn't do is bring in the income that we need. And it's still very early days to see whether the digital offers can bring in the levels of income that actually really will help our bottom line.
Indeed, indeed. And Terry, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, a couple of other areas. One is the sort of nature of work. I mean, back to what Neil was saying about, the majority of the people in our industry are freelancers, micro businesses. A lot of them have been locked down or staying in either homes or small towns, rural areas, or what have you, for the last few months. We've seen the growth in the Federation, at least, of digital working. We've introduced Workspace, which is a tool created by Facebook. So it kind of looks like Facebook, but without the ads, which is great. And it allows creative people to, just as you would on Facebook, create rooms or spaces by region, by town, by speciality. And we've got thousands of creatives working there remotely, not just communicating with each other, but collaborating with each other around new ideas and projects. And then tied to that, we've started to put together a network of workspaces. You all across the country, you see these creative workspaces in small market towns, in coastal towns, and we're planning to hopefully link many of them together to kind of create a reciprocal arrangement whereby if you're creative and you happen to be in Northumberland working, you can go into a space as well as do digital working and work with other creative people. Or if you're on holiday in Cornwall, you can do the same, or on a business trip in Birmingham. Because if you just want a desk, you can go to Starbucks and meet people, for a coffee. But I think people are looking for a network in this new world, not just a desk, a network of other creatives. So what we're finding is that this is quite interesting for the re-emergence maybe of small towns, because one I was talking to this morning is in Taunton town centre, which would be great to have more people buying their coffees and sandwiches in Taunton town centre and collaborating there, not just in Soho where our offices might be. So it's getting people to think laterally about how they do things differently.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, absolutely. Okay, and so you've both outlined some of the really serious challenges, existential challenges to organisations and businesses within the sector. So with that in mind, what are the skills that you believe that leaders in the sector really need to harness in order to start ensuring that their organisations and that their teams can be organisations that come through this crisis and start to rebuild? And Terry, what are your thoughts on those skills?
Well, to some extent, I think actually the leaders in the creative sector have got a slight advantage here. So if you think about a lot of work that's done in the creative sector, whether it be in the theatre, film, telly, or what have you, a lot of it's project-based work. A lot of it consists of, start with an idea, a bunch of people come together, many of whom don't know each other, at different sections in the project to create something together, and then they all explode and go the different ways afterwards into another project. And that's something that mainstream business has tried to recreate over many years and do very well, but the creative sector does very well. So to a certain extent, working on projects rather than in jobs all the time is what the creative sector does well. So that I think they need to carry on doing. I think there are other things which all businesses need to do, which is how do we work remotely? If everybody's working remotely, how do you create that sense of family and affiliation with something while everybody's remote? I think that would be important. And also being open to doing things differently. There are parts of our industry that really don't want things to change and would like things to go back to what they were. And that isn't going to happen, I don't think. So we have to be open to change. Leaders and managers have to be open to change in terms of business models, in terms of working with people, workforces, managing people. That all has to be rethought. We have to be open to that.
Great, thanks. And Neil, your thoughts?
Very similar to Terry's, but just ensuring the creative beating heart of the organisation stays within it. I've always said every creative decision is a business decision, and every business decision is a creative one. And globe-wise, we've got still 240 staff furloughed, with another 40 who are working on current projects. And what I found is just trying to ensure that one continues to communicate, but not relying on Zoom and Teams. Actually picking up the phone to individuals has been really useful. Though it always feels like you've got no more news to say, trying to do regular video updates, not just from me, but also from other colleagues, has been quite key. And indeed, yeah, the challenges of remodelling an organisation. Back in March, we were a £25 million turnover organisation. And as we bring together our strategies to reopen next year and then rebuild and recover, we're going to be an organisation of the scale and size that we were probably 10 years ago as a £13 million turnover organisation. And the challenges around international tourism not coming back to the similar levels that we've enjoyed for another 3 or 4 years probably. I found that transparency in giving as much information to colleagues. It's the first time that I've done an all-staff meeting with a full cash flow forecast, so they can see how we are draining the valuable reserves that we put aside for significant capital projects are being used, and how they can help reduce that burn rate and also help to innovate and bring more income in. So yeah, around that leadership is transparency and taking everyone on the journey.
Yes, indeed. And you know, in many ways, I guess that level of transparency and trust is going to be vitally important across all sectors. The human level of management and leadership seems to be dialing up, and for the good, I'm sure. I'd really like to just get both of your thoughts on perhaps the 3 things that most concern you right now, but also the 3 things that you're most optimistic about in terms of the future. And Neil, perhaps you could start us off on this one, please.
Well, the fact that I'm most concerned about at the moment is within the performing arts industry. At the moment, 70% of organisations will run out of cash by the end of the year. The Globe isn't in that situation, but as Terry said, the 1.57 billion cultural recovery package that was launched actually by the Chancellor and the Secretary of State, Oliver Dowden, from the Globe stage on the 6th of July, we took some hope in him saying that Shakespeare's Globe is one of the UK's crown jewels. But sounds a large amount, but for our industry, it's going to be spread rather thinly. And we obviously have to wait to see until November whether we've been successful with that. I take some optimism that obviously Shakespeare, our house writer, was writing during a different type of pandemic, a plague. Hamlet was written after the death of his son because of the plague. He wrote the sonnets whilst the theatres were closed. And we have seen over the years, even though theatres have been closed down, a desire to get together, congregate and watch live performance. And though everyone has moved to a more digital world, I think the future excitement of bringing people together into a venue and experience plays together will be something that I'm sure won't be lost in the way that we live our lives.
Indeed. Here. And before I come to you, Terry, in a moment or two, we're going to go to some questions from the audience. And so if you're watching and you've got a question you'd like to pose to Terry or to Neil, do please drop it into the comments in the live chat. But Terry, your thoughts around what you're most concerned about and also what you're most optimistic about.
Yeah, and I'll just echo Neil's point that, you know, everybody I speak to quite broadly, not just here, but in the US and in relation to the creative sector, are really desperate to get back into the theatres. I think there's going to be a mad rush to get back in when people can get in safely, of course. So that would be great. What am I most concerned about? I suppose the impact of another wave of the pandemic and what it will do. And because people are working hard everywhere to try and, you know, work our way out of this and work our way through this. But, you know, it would be terrible to have another big lockdown, you know, that sets everybody back again. So, and that's out of our hands to a certain extent, right? And what I'm optimistic about, and I see it every day in my work with our members and with people in the creative industry sector, is that creative people are very good at problem solving and thinking through how to deal with very tricky subjects, whether they be matters of the heart or the head. And so I'm very confident of our community in the broader sense, that is going to come together as a movement to get everybody through this. And I'm seeing it all the time. People are coming up with brilliant ideas. So I'm very confident in the community and the people to get through it. I'm concerned about what's outside their control that might hit them again.
I'll just have one of the most shocking statistics I got last week was hotel occupancy in London was only at 7%. And so that real concern about our major cities and people being unwilling to use public transport to get into them. And we can see there isn't a significant return to offices in central London, that there is where is the audience going to be if people have not keen to use public transport and come into town?
Indeed, unfortunately, we have a long way to go with this still. So let's turn our attention to some questions from the audience. And thank you, Victoria, a great initial question. Victoria asks, how are you handling morale and well-being of staff when things are so uncertain, particularly given that in the sector, you're one of the last to be able to reopen? Neil, you've given a few sort of reflections on that already, but anything you'd like to add to what you've said there?
We identified two key members of our HR team to lead on staff welfare and emotional support. We brought in additional resources and people to be able to, for staff to speak to privately or as in groups and departments. We've created a lot of teams, hubs and groups that probably have lessened over the time, but during initial lockdown, bringing people together from book clubs to games to cocktail hours, and trying to make sure that people feel connected. But of course, I'm always ensure that I try and recognise those people at home who are looking after children, and at time were also having to do homeschooling, and also recognising that colleagues of mine have already got partners and loved ones who have lost their jobs and are already in a difficult situation financially, and so trying to provide as much financial advice and planning advice that we can offer for our colleagues to try and plan for the future has been, I believe, well received.
And Terry, the organisations that you work in and with, what's the best of the techniques you've seen to help staff?
Well, it's quite interesting. We've got offices in Bristol, in Manchester, Elstree at the studios, and Covent Garden, and they've got very different personalities in terms of the office personality, the types of people that work there, and interesting. The people in Covent Garden who are a younger crowd definitely did not want to work remotely from day one. They just thought it was horrible. And now they're the crowd that probably doesn't want, months on is more nervous about going back than say Bristol and Manchester, who were quite happy to work remotely at the beginning. And through all of that, different employees are handling things in different ways. And as a manager, the one thing that Zoom has been actually quite good at is it seems to have improved communication. Communication has kind of got more real, if that's more real and more human and less corporate, perhaps. And what that means is that when people have had problems, and maybe it's to do with campaigning outside of anything we're doing, people have been more open to talking about when they're having problems, and when they've had problems, the support has been absolutely there for them. And that seemed to have worked. Now, it won't work forever, of course. We've got to get back, and we're starting to get back. But I think it's improved management communication without the S this time.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Ed, and Ed asks, what would your advice be to students currently studying creative programs who may be concerned about their employment prospects in the current climate and its long-term effects on the sector. Who'd like to take that first? Perhaps Terry, you might want to offer a view.
Yeah, there are lots of things you can get involved with. I mean, you know, from again, I mentioned the Creative Industries Federation. We have 60 universities that are members. We've just launched a student membership in this academic year in September. And the purpose of that is to try and start creating meaningful linkages between students and the industry at the time when both are looking at each other and thinking, is this going to be a good fit? So you are going to see, as a student, more opportunities to connect with industry. I think the Kickstart thing may well be very helpful to young people in this respect as well, both to businesses and to young people. So start creating connections outside of the university with industry. It's not as hard as you think it is, especially if you join up with linking organisations like ourselves and unions and other trade bodies as well.
Okay, great advice. Anything to add, Neil, from your perspective?
I think it's about flexibility, because we've seen a lot more digital activities happening, digital performances, and where people might have thought they were going to be working in a specific type of area of the industry, just taking the opportunity to think, well, actually, there are some companies and sectors within the creative industries that are doing extremely well at the moment and will be looking for more employees. So maybe, you know, initial thoughts might not be the way that you actually have to start your career.
Indeed. Okay. Next question comes from Motzi. Might be a difficult one to answer, this one, but Motzi asks, what are your top tips for encouraging the public back to venues as and when restrictions are eased and they can reopen? Neil, I don't know if you've got thoughts on that at this stage or not.
Well, it's just been very clear how you are providing a COVID-safe environment, and ensuring that when people come in the way that they are doing for our guided tour, that would normally be welcoming more than 1,000 visitors a day, our maximum number is 200. And we provide a lot of photos of a tour going on, and how people can actually get into London safely. And I met a number of the people who were doing our guided tour, which we started 2 weeks ago. And for the majority of them, that was their first visit into central London since middle of March. And so it's just trying to create that confidence for everyone about that COVID safety.
Great, thank you. Last question comes from Lizzie, and I think this is a great way to finish actually today. Possibly one that might be a bit of a challenge for both of you. So, with the benefit of hindsight, asks Lizzie, is there one thing that you wish you'd done differently, or that you've really learned from through the COVID experience? And Terry, perhaps you'd like to give us your thoughts on that one.
Not live in Cornwall, which has felt very far away. I know it sounds idyllic, but when you've been locked down since March, yeah, maybe I should have stayed a bit closer to London. No, but I guess on a serious note, I think I probably, at the beginning of the pandemic, I probably rushed to a lot of solutions too early, thinking this is what we need to do, only to then have to dump them a month later because the whole situation changed. And so I'm learning now to not A, believe there's a silver bullet answer to everything, and B, to think carefully about whether what I'm going to do is the right move before I make the move.
Okay, thank you. And Neil?
Just winding back to, I think it was Monday the 16th of March, the number 10 briefings that had started, and the PM advised people to stay away from theatres. Didn't close us down, and I had 2 performances about to start, and that news came in at 6:30. and at 7:15 we decided to cancel. And I wish now in hindsight I'd given those actors and creatives and musicians and stage managers and everyone involved in those shows that last opportunity, because at that time we thought we might be reopened in July or indeed opening next month. And I really regret that decision, because there was an audience there, and we could have made sure that they were in some sort of COVID safe environment, and done those final shows that would have brought the curtain down into the pandemic and the crisis that we're still dealing with.
Well, look, thank you both for your candour and your honesty in the answer to Lizzie's question. That was quite a tough one to finish with. And indeed, thank you both for giving us your time and your insights in what is an incredibly challenging time in your sectors today. Thank you once again, Neil and Terry, for joining us, and everybody for tuning in today and posing your questions. Just a reminder that if you're not yet a member, there'll be a link on the screen in the moment where you can find out more. And if you're already part of the CMI community, don't forget to visit Management Direct, where you can get much more depth on all of the issues that we've discussed today and many more too. Many thanks, and enjoy the weekend when it arrives.
Thank you.
Thanks.